They say an HOA will stop at nothing to get its way, but I never imagined mine would send biker thugs to my doorstep to scare my wife. Picture this. It's a quiet Saturday afternoon. My wife is in the garden trimming roses, and suddenly the rumble of 3 motorcycles shatters the peace. They roll in, leather jackets, boots scraping gravel, helmets hiding faces, and one of them actually points at her and says, "We need to have a talk." My heart went cold, because I knew exactly who had orchestrated this stunt. Karen, the HOA president, with a personal vendetta against me, had finally decided intimidation letters and threats weren't enough. Now she'd escalated to outsiders. But here's the twist. 3 minutes after swaggering up to my property, these so-called tough guys were stammering, pleading, practically begging me to stop. What happened between their arrival and their surrender? That's the part you're going to want to hear. But before I show you how everything flipped upside down, how they realized they'd picked the wrong family on the wrong day, I need to rewind the story. Because this didn't begin with motorcycles or leather jackets. It started weeks earlier, with Karen and a petty grudge that spiraled into something darker, uglier, and far more dangerous than anyone in the neighborhood expected. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just wait, because every single step of this war was leading to that showdown in my driveway. Let me take you back to where it all began, when Karen decided my family was her next target. My name's Daniel Rourke, 49 years old, former Army mechanic, now running a small restoration garage out by Lakewood Estates, the kind of place where neighbors are supposed to wave when they pass by, not plot against you in board meetings. My wife, Ellen, is the heart of this home, the one who keeps our garden blooming, who bakes extra pies just to share with the people around us. We didn't move here for drama, we moved here for peace, and for a while, it was exactly that. Until Karen Brightwell became HOA president. She's the kind of person who thrives on control, obsessed with bylaws, rules, appearances. At first it was little things, letters about grass length, a warning over our garage lights being too bright, even though they were solar-powered and half the neighborhood used the same ones. But when she realized I wasn't the type to roll over and pay whatever fine she cooked up, it turned into a personal crusade. Suddenly, every board notice had my name on it. Every complaint mysteriously circled back to our house. And the worst part, she didn't just come after me. She started circling Ellen, too. That's when I knew this wasn't about community standards anymore. This was about power. And here's the thing. You can come after me all day long, I've dealt with worse. But the moment you drag my wife into it, you cross a line I can't ignore. What Karen didn't know back then was that every cheap trick, every petty letter, every insult was just fueling something bigger. A storm was brewing, and the day she tried to use thugs to scare Ellen, she set it off. But to understand why that moment ended with those bikers begging me for mercy, you need to hear about the weeks that led up to it. It started small, almost laughable, the kind of thing you'd think was just an annoying misunderstanding. One afternoon, I got a notice folded neatly in an envelope, taped to my front door. It claimed my garage door was unsightly and violated HOA guidelines. Funny thing is, my garage door is steel gray, same as 4 other houses on our street. But mine? Mine suddenly wasn't good enough. A week later, another letter showed up, this time warning me about my truck being parked too close to the curb, even though it was well within the property line. Then came the fines, $50 here, $100 there, little paper bullets aimed straight at my mailbox. At first, I thought maybe this was just Karen trying to make a point, flex her shiny new title as HOA president. But the timing was too perfect. The letters always came after a run-in with her. Like the morning Ellen told me Karen had stopped her while she was watering the flowers, making some passive-aggressive remark about how some people don't respect the rules. Or the day I caught her standing across the street snapping pictures of my Harley like she was gathering evidence for some crime. It was all designed to wear us down, to make us bend the knee. But here's the problem with people like Karen. They assume everyone else will fold. They've never dealt with someone who's willing to push back harder. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every little smirk when she passed our house. Because I had a feeling this wasn't going to stop with paper threats. And sure enough, I was right. What started as letters escalated into something that made Ellen lose sleep at night. And when a bully realizes paper and ink don't scare you, they look for something louder, something heavier. That's when the real intimidation began. The day I realized Karen wasn't just after me, but had set her sights on Ellen, everything changed. My wife has the kind of spirit that makes people feel safe. She waves at every neighbor, remembers birthdays, even brings soup when someone's sick. She never once stepped into the line of fire, never raised her voice about the HOA. And yet, she became the target. It started when Karen cornered her at the mailbox, pretending to make small talk, then casually, dropping, "It must be hard, living with someone who doesn't respect the community rules." Ellen brushed it off, but I saw the way she carried it home like a stone in her chest. A few days later, she got a letter addressed to her specifically, accusing her of letting the garden fall below community standards. That garden is her pride, her therapy, the one place she pours her soul into. I'll be honest, I saw her cry that night, hands dirty from pulling weeds that didn't even exist, whispering, "What did I do wrong?" That's when I knew this wasn't about bylaws anymore. This was Karen trying to break us, piece by piece. She couldn't shake me, so she went after the person she thought would fold first. But here's what Karen didn't understand. Going after Ellen was the worst mistake she could have made. Because my patience, that's one thing. My wife's peace, that's sacred ground. And the more Karen pushed, the more I stopped seeing her as an annoying neighbor with too much time on her hands, and started seeing her as an enemy who needed to be dealt with. Ellen didn't deserve the whispers, the pointed looks, the fake smiles that came with hidden knives. And as Karen's tactics grew bolder, I realized something darker was coming. The HOA wasn't just testing limits anymore, they were preparing to cross them. It wasn't enough for Karen to bury us under letters and fines. Soon she began poisoning the well of the entire neighborhood. Little whispers spread like wildfire, and somehow every single one seemed to have her fingerprints all over them. One morning, Ellen came back from a walk looking pale. She'd overheard two neighbors muttering about how some people can't afford to keep up their homes and how we were supposedly behind on dues, a lie so bold it would have been laughable if it hadn't cut her so deeply. A week later, someone left an anonymous note in our mailbox suggesting we were lowering property values and that it might be best if we sold the house and moved on. Funny thing? Karen was the only one at the last HOA meeting arguing about our place being an eyesore. I started noticing changes. Friends we'd barbecued with stopped waving. People we'd helped with yard work suddenly wouldn't meet our eyes. It was like the whole block had been handed a script, and every line painted us as outsiders. The worst was at the local diner, where Ellen volunteers on weekends. One of the board members sat down at a booth, and loud enough for half the room to hear, joked that we were the couple who thought the rules didn't apply. Ellen came home shaking, asking me how much longer we could take it. That was Karen's plan all along. Isolate us, starve us of support, make us so miserable we'd give in. But I've been through war zones. I've stared down bigger threats than gossip and clipped conversations. And while Karen thought her smear campaign was breaking us, all it was really doing was giving me clarity. Because if she was willing to drag the whole neighborhood into her vendetta, what else was she willing to do? That answer showed up with the roar of motorcycle engines in my driveway. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first heard the sound, low, guttural, like thunder rolling across the pavement. At first, I thought it was just some kids showing off down on Main Street, but then it got closer. Too close. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before you even see it. Ellen was kneeling by the rose bushes, clipping away, when 3 black motorcycles came crawling up our cul-de-sac like wolves circling a lamb. They stopped right at the edge of my driveway, engines rumbling, helmets reflecting the afternoon sun. I stepped out onto the porch, every nerve in my body on high alert. One of them killed his engine and leaned forward, pointing a finger straight at Ellen. "We need to talk," he said, voice muffled through the helmet, but the menace was clear enough. Ellen froze, clippers slipping from her hand into the dirt. I walked down the steps slow, controlled, every instinct from years in uniform, telling me to size them up, look for openings, measure their stance. They weren't neighbors, that much was obvious. These were outsiders, muscle for hire. Which meant only one thing: Karen had brought them here. The lead biker flicked something in his hand, a crumpled paper which he let drop onto the gravel. I didn't even have to unfold it to know what it was. Another HOA notice, another demand. Only this time, it wasn't about grass length or dues. This was about fear. They weren't here to talk about rules. They were here to send a message. But here's the thing Karen never considered. Intimidation only works if the other person is scared. And me? I wasn't scared. I was calculating. Because in that moment, I knew exactly how this was going to end. Not with me backing down, but with these so-called tough guys realizing they'd just walked into the worst mistake of their lives. The leader finally swung a leg off his bike and stepped forward, boots crunching on the gravel like gunshots in the silence. He didn't bother taking his helmet off, just stood there, broad-shouldered and trying to look 10 feet tall. He jabbed a gloved finger at Ellen and barked, "This isn't going to end well if you don't listen." That was enough. I moved between him and my wife, steady, calm, my eyes locked on his visor. I didn't raise my voice, didn't posture, I just said, "You want to talk? You talk to me." The second biker shifted, cracking his knuckles, clearly trying to add weight to the act. But I could see it already. The little signs they weren't used to real pushback. Their stance was off, their words rehearsed. These weren't seasoned outlaws, they were props in Karen's theater, brought in to scare us with noise and leather. Still, intimidation is intimidation. And I could feel Ellen's hand trembling against my back as she whispered, "Daniel, please." I tilted my head just enough to tell her without words, "I've got this." The lead biker finally pulled the paper from the ground, flicked it at me, and growled, "You've got one last chance. Remove the bike, pay the fines, or next time we won't be so polite." I almost laughed at the word polite, but I held it in. Because now wasn't the moment for the punchline. Now was the moment to let them believe they were in control. The tension hung so thick, you could feel it in your teeth, like a storm about to break. But what they didn't realize was that I'd already seen their whole playbook. And while they thought this was their move, the truth was, it was mine. Because behind my calm stare, I was already lining up the next step, the one that would turn this entire standoff upside down. What the bikers didn't know, what Karen could never have guessed, was that I wasn't standing there unprepared. I've spent years in the Army, years learning how to size up threats, control my breathing, keep my head when others lose theirs. To them, I was just some middle-aged mechanic with a Harley and a chip on his shoulder. They had no clue that every angle, every twitch of their shoulders, every glance they shot at each other was being logged and broken down in my head like pieces on a chessboard. And the more they postured, the more I realized something else. They were nervous. One had his jaw clenched too tight. Another kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. These weren't men built for real confrontation. They were men hired to make noise. And that gave me leverage. But leverage only matters if you know how to use it. What Karen forgot when she sent them here was that I document everything. I had security cameras rolling from 3 different angles. Audio crisp as a courtroom. Mic. Every word they spit out landing straight onto a hard drive I'd already backed up. Meaning, every threat, every demand, every attempt at intimidation wasn't just noise anymore. It was evidence. And not the kind you can wiggle out of with a smug HOA smile. Now I could have revealed that right then, pulled the rug from under them on the spot. But where's the fun in that? Sometimes the most powerful weapon you can use is silence, letting the other side believe they're holding the cards. Because when you finally flip the table, the shock hits harder. So I kept quiet, let them strut, let them believe they were scaring us. And all the while, I was setting the trap they were too blind to see coming. I let them circle, let them toss their threats around like they were holding all the power, until finally the leader stepped so close I could feel the heat from his engine on my legs. He jabbed his finger at my chest and said, "Last warning, old man, move that Harley or you'll regret it." That's when I smiled, just enough to make him hesitate. Without a word, I pointed up at the corner of the garage, where the red glow of my security camera blinked like a quiet sentinel. "Funny thing," I said, calm as ever. "That mic you've been talking into picks up every syllable, and it's live streamed to a cloud account my attorney already has access to." For the first time, the leader's helmet tilted just slightly, like he wasn't sure if I was bluffing. I wasn't. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed the screen, and played back the last 30 seconds. Their own voices spilling out crystal clear, every threat they'd just made echoing back at them. The swagger drained fast. The second biker cursed under his breath. The third took a step back, glancing at the street like he was calculating an escape. I didn't raise my voice, didn't lunge, didn't need to. I just let the weight of silence crush them, then said, "So here's how this goes. You ride back to wherever Karen pulled you from, and you tell her this stunt didn't scare me. It exposed her. And the next time she thinks about crossing that line, it won't be me she's dealing with. It'll be the state attorney." The air went dead quiet. For the first time all afternoon, they weren't the predators anymore. They were prey, and they knew it. The moment the recording of their own voices echoed back at them, the bravado drained like water through a sieve. The leader, the same man who had just called me old man, with all the swagger he could muster, suddenly stiffened, shifting his weight like a trapped animal, realizing the cage door had slammed shut. The second biker ripped off his helmet, sweat beading down his forehead, and muttered, "Look, we don't want trouble, all right? We were just told to—" But he cut himself short, realizing he'd already said too much. The third, the youngest of the bunch, practically threw his hands up, stammering, "Please, man, just delete it. We'll leave right now. Nobody has to know." That word, please, was the sound of their facade collapsing. 3 minutes earlier, they'd rolled in like executioners. Now they stood like schoolboys caught with stolen candy. I stepped closer, calm, measured, making sure every second of their unraveling was caught on camera. "Begging's a good start," I told them quietly. "But it doesn't erase the fact that you came here to scare my wife." Ellen stood behind me, arms folded tight across her chest, still shaken but with a spark of fire in her eyes at the sight of these so-called tough guys reduced to groveling. The leader finally raised both hands, voice unsteady. "We'll tell her we couldn't do it. We'll tell her we're out. Just don't hand that over." And there it was, the power shift laid bare. They weren't demanding anymore. They were pleading for mercy, bargaining for an exit. And the irony? They thought this was me being merciful. They had no idea this was only the beginning of how badly their little stunt was about to backfire. The beauty of a plan collapsing is that it doesn't happen all at once. It unravels thread by thread until the whole thing is a heap on the floor. By the time those bikers roared out of my driveway, their tails tucked firmly between their legs, I already had everything I needed. Within an hour, the footage was copied onto 2 flash drives, uploaded to a secure cloud, and emailed straight to my attorney. By Monday morning, it was sitting on the desk of the state attorney's office with a neat little cover letter, outlining exactly how the HOA president had escalated from fines and harassment to organized intimidation. And here's the part Karen never saw coming: the bikers themselves. Faced with a choice between potential charges and telling the truth, they folded faster than wet cardboard, signed statements, admissions, even receipts of the cash Karen had handed them. Suddenly, it wasn't my Harley or my wife's garden under scrutiny anymore. It was Karen herself. At the next HOA meeting, the smugness was gone, replaced by a pale face and trembling hands as word spread about the investigation. Neighbors who had once parroted her lies now avoided her like a sickness. Within weeks, she was stripped of her position, slapped with a restraining order, and staring down a lawsuit that would drain every ounce of her arrogance. And as for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just wheeled my Harley onto the driveway, polished chrome catching the afternoon sun, and sat with Ellen on the porch while the same neighbors who had once whispered about us now offered sheepish waves and mumbled apologies. Karen wanted to break us. Instead, she broke herself. And the irony of it all? Her own hired muscle, the one sent to scare us, ended up being the wrecking ball that tore her empire down. So that's how it all ended. Not with me moving my Harley, not with Ellen breaking under Karen's pressure, but with the HOA president herself watching her own scheme crumble into dust. And if you take anything from this story, let it be this: bullies only win when you stay silent. The moment you document, the moment you push back with facts instead of fear, the entire balance of power shifts. Karen thought she had the neighborhood, the rules, even hired muscle on her side. But in the end, all she really had was arrogance. And arrogance is the weakest shield of all. Now, I've told you how this chapter closed for us, but I want to know something from you. What's the worst HOA story you've ever heard or lived through yourself? Drop it in the comments below, because I promise, your story might just be crazier than mine. And if you made it this far, Hit that like button so more people can see how these HOA nightmares really play out. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more real stories where everyday people stand their ground against corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power. Because trust me, this isn't the last time someone like Karen will try, and it definitely won't be the last time they lose.